Tonight, the country's moment of reckoning as we mark 1 year since the Capitol riot. The infamous day an angry mob breached the Capitol building, making it all the way into the Senate chambers. President Biden today placing the blame on Donald Trump, calling him a, quote, defeated former president who incited the violence. Lawmakers who hid for their lives marking today with several events. Our Ellison Barber, who was also caught in the middle, joins Top Story with what she saw and felt that day. Plus, the stories of heroism, the Capitol officers who tried to stop the siege. And Chuck Todd is here, his sobering take on where we are as a country 1 year later. Also tonight, as COVID cases explode and hospitals plead for help, a team of former advisors to President Biden, medical experts, calling for a new national strategy when it comes to COVID, saying the White House needs a broader vision. This as the governor of Kansas issues a disaster declaration to help the overwhelmed hospitals. Plus, the group of young people, some still stuck in Mexico after they were filmed partying on a plane with no masks or social distancing as cases skyrocket in tourist destinations. The winter storm slam, more than 80 million people under winter alerts from coast to coast. Snow shutting down parts of a highway in Kentucky after leading to dozens of crashes. That system now sweeping across the country, packing another round of winter weather for the I-95 corridor just in time for the morning commute. Al Roker again tonight on Top Story. Kazakhstan in crisis, the car plowing through a line of police during deadly clashes between fuel protesters and authorities. Neighboring countries, including Russia, now sending in troops. Conviction in jeopardy? 2 jurors in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial admitting they may have swayed the others with their own stories of sexual abuse. The judge now calling back lawyers for both sides. What this could mean. And wild shootout, the new body cam footage showing the moment gunfire erupted between a suspect and 2 New York City police officers. Top Story starts right now. Good evening. I'm Tom Llamas. We want to welcome our viewers watching us on Hulu for the first time tonight. And we begin Top Story with the country marking 1 year since supporters of former President Trump stormed the Capitol to protest election results. The images burned in the memory of so many Americans, that angry mob scaling the walls of the Capitol building, protesters beating and using pepper spray on officers who were trying to keep them out. Inside, the rioters rushing the building's historic hallways, looking for lawmakers, including then Vice President Mike Pence. Members of Congress and police barricading doors to the House gallery, but the group eventually made it inside. In a fiery speech today, President Biden taking direct aim at former President Trump, saying he, quote, spread a web of lies that caused the violence. Lawmakers marking the day with several events, including a candlelight vigil on the steps of the Capitol just a few hours ago. Tonight, we're going to hear from several people who were on the Hill on that day, from a Capitol officer to our own Ellison Barber, reporting live as the mob moved around her. We want to begin with Kristen Welker, who leads us off tonight from the White House.
Outside the Capitol today, a somber scene and sharp contrast to those indelible images from a year ago. Rioters breaching the building and the nation's democracy, attacking officers, parading a noose in the crowd, scuffling with police inside Statuary Hall, all unfolding right where President Biden and Vice President Harris were today to mark a painful anniversary.
I will defend this nation. And I will allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of democracy.
In his most forceful attack against his predecessor, the president placing blame squarely at the feet of former President Trump without ever mentioning him by name.
For the first time in our history, a president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power as a violent mob breached the Capitol.
Mr. Biden arguing his predecessor's false claims about election fraud and failure to accept defeat led to the attack that day.
He can't accept he lost. He refused to accept the results of an election and the will of the American people. His bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution.
Slamming Mr. Trump's inaction as the riot was happening.
We didn't see a former president who had just rallied the mob to attack, sitting in the private dining room off the Oval Office in the White House, watching it all on television and doing nothing for hours.
And blasting those who have continued to push the so-called big lie that the election was stolen.
He's not just a former president. He's a defeated former president.
The vice president comparing January 6 to infamous attacks on the U.S. that killed thousands, including Pearl Harbor and 9/11.
Certain dates echo throughout history. December 7th, 1941. September 11th, 2001. And January 6th, 2021.
After the speeches, former President Trump dismissing the event as political theater, saying it was just a distraction for the fact Biden has completely and totally failed, and that Democrats want to own January 6th so they can stoke fears and divide America. Trump ally Lindsey Graham called for the rioters to be prosecuted, but also slammed Mr. Biden's speech as an effort to resurrect a failed presidency. Sharp partisan divides were on display today. Few Republicans participating. Only Congresswoman Liz Cheney and former Vice President Dick Cheney there for a moment of silence. Then a prayer vigil at dusk. Solemn ceremonies remembering a day that changed America.
Kristen Welker joins us now live from the White House. Kristen, you have some new reporting tonight, I understand, about the whereabouts of Vice President Harris during the attack?
Tom, that's right. A White House official tells us the vice president was actually at the DNC headquarters when that pipe bomb that we reported on at the time was discovered. She was there until she was evacuated. Big picture here, Tom. The incident raises questions about the security of the vice president on that day. And of course, security has been a big issue in the wake of the attack, with law enforcement, the Biden administration looking into what more could have been done to secure the Capitol, the people inside the Capitol, and of course, the surrounding buildings as well, Tom.
And a reminder, that bomber still has not been caught. All right, Kristen Welker leading us off from the White House. Kristen, thank you. We all saw the images of January 6th, the police clashing with rioters, the tear gas, the destruction. But right there on Capitol Hill, NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber was in the middle of it all, giving viewers a sense of what was happening as these almost unfathomable events played out. Take a listen to her reporting that day.
Lester, I just want to show you what's happening right now. It looks like to us the protesters have been able to take the bicycle barricades down here, and they're making their way up the steps of the U.S. Capitol right now. This was a peaceful protest. People were here. They were vocal. They wanted their voices heard, but things were relatively calm. And in a split second, you saw the crowd rush the front towards the barricades and make their way up here. And it felt like the entire mood, the whole day, it changed.
Ellison joins us now live from that same spot. As we've reached this one-year anniversary, some people, including GOP legislators, have tried to downplay the violence and the severity of the attack, saying it was peaceful. But as we saw there in your earlier reporting, it may have started out pretty calm, but clearly it got incredibly violent.
Yeah, it changed very quickly, and it remained violent. It remained aggressive for the rest of the evening. Listening to what some people who say they are saying lies about what happened that day when they say that it was a peaceful protest, that it was not a big deal, that it was outside agitators. It's not true. And those lies are often told by people who know better. I was reading through a journal entry I'd written at the end of January 6th, 1 year ago, and I wrote in it, and I'm going to read some of it to you, talking about how I'd spoken to a man in militia-like gear about 30 to 40 minutes before we saw those rioters, those protesters, breach the bicycle barricades. I'd asked him why he was dressed in that militia-like gear. He told me he was here to observe. Then I asked him this, quote, "What do you think happens after the Electoral College votes are counted here?" He told me, "I think it is entirely possible that 1 million armed men show up here to fix the problem." He went on to say, "I hope that that never happens." I wrote that night that in retrospect, I should have stopped and said, wait, what do you mean people show up? He'd also said at another point that if something didn't change, that people were going to rush the Capitol. I should have said, wait, are people planning to do that? But the idea at the time seemed so far-fetched that I didn't even process it until later in that day. But that's exactly what happened. On January 6th, you had a group of violent pro-Trump rioters who rushed the Capitol. And for many of them, Tom, it was a planned action prior to that day. And it's frustrating to hear people try and rewrite what happened that day, because we were here, we saw it, we were here from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. I ended the night around this time behind a police line because our crew was being chased and threatened by pro-Trump supporters. Tom?
Ellison Barber, who was in the middle of it all 1 year ago. Ellison, thank you. We want to bring in now NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, thanks for joining us today. I know it's been a long day for you. We heard earlier from President Biden making a very pointed address, and while not referring to Donald Trump explicitly by name, certainly accusing him of inciting the January 6th attack. We saw that in Kristen's piece, and that very, very forceful speech. It was really unlike others we heard today.
It's unlike any speech he's given. Really, I mean, I'd say, you know, I talked to the White House after he gave it, basically asking around to my sources, why didn't we hear from him sooner on this? And, you know, there was sort of one explanation they had is, hey, you can't just do this on any Thursday in the East Room, a moment like this. But there's another reality here in talking to folks about this for a while is, you know, Joe Biden believed, and I don't think he was alone, I believe this too, that if you sort of stayed above the Trump fray, didn't refer to it, sort of stopped litigating it and moved on, that it would fade away and that this would go away and his grip would slowly go away. That didn't happen. And so here we are a year later, and this has gotten worse, not better. And I think he gave a speech that was much more forceful than I think many people expected, but I think it was a necessary speech. He had to lay it out point by point, get at the facts, make it clear, hey, Republicans picked up seats in the House. Are those were the same ballots that were used to elect the President of the United States. So, you know, essentially laying out the idea that this was illogical. So, look, I think it was a very forceful speech. I know some Republicans accused him of being partisan. It's only a partisan speech if you believe the former president's lies. It was, to me, a very robust defense of what the American democracy is really all about.
How much do you think this is going to affect votes in the future? And I ask because it seems like some Republicans have made a clear political calculation, right? Mm-hmm. Some did not want to talk today, did not want to partake in events. Others, like Senator Ted Cruz, called this a violent terrorist attack. You have Karl Rove in the Wall Street Journal tonight saying that Republicans should essentially have no absolution for those who planned the events. So I wonder if Republicans here, at least some of them, figure voters won't care about this in the future.
Look, I do think you talk to strategists on the Republican side who work for campaigns for a living, and they will tell you, you know, that but for a few places where there are actual swing voters, this isn't going to be an issue inside Republican primaries. And if it is an issue, it's an issue of, were you on the side of Donald Trump? And, you know, in all these criticisms you brought up, Karl Rove's, Ted Cruz's, they all still dance around the central figure in all of this, which is Donald Trump. And a lot of the elected Republicans who quietly are hoping Donald Trump will go away are hoping other people do the dirty work, right? Whether it's Mitch McConnell, who wanted to vote for impeachment but decided politically it would have been too divisive for his party. He didn't want the January 6th commission. Now he's very much looking forward to the findings. You know, I do think a lot of elected Republicans thought the same thing that President Biden did, that his grip would slowly ease on the party. And it didn't. And I think some are regretting that they didn't help throw him overboard, but now they don't know what to do. And the fact of the matter is 75% of the Republican Party believes Trump's lies. If you're an elected Republican, you got to cater. They've decided, many of them have decided they have to cater to their voters.
You know, every Sunday you get a snapshot of American politics in this country. You've been doing it now for the last year since this has happened. And I wonder, are we more united? Are we more divided? Or are we essentially in the same place as we were January 6th of 2021?
Oh, Tom, I think we're in a worse place. I think there's, you know, a year ago, I don't think you would have had a poll number that said 20%, only 20% of Americans have confidence in our election process. You know, my greatest fear here, Tom, is that we have another free and fair election in 24. Let's say Donald Trump wins it, and it is fair. But a lot of people don't believe it on the left either. I mean, because they look at what's happening in these state legislatures and think, oh, it won't be a fair vote in Arizona, or it won't be a fair vote in Georgia. And we already know that Donald Trump has sort of, you know, created this illusion that the last one wasn't fair. That's when it all falls apart, Tom. Right? If nobody believes in the institution of the democracy and nobody believes the election results, you know, it's hard enough when only one party will accept losing. What if neither party ever accepts it?
Chuck Todd on the state of politics in America. Chuck, thank you. And we will have much more on the one-year anniversary of the January 6th riot later in this broadcast. All right, now to the ongoing surge in COVID cases, the 7-day average nearing 600,000. But experts estimate the true numbers are even higher. Still, only 35% of Americans have gotten their booster shot. All of this as a team of medical experts that advised President Biden as he was transitioning into office on the pandemic, calling for a completely new strategy when it comes to COVID, saying the White House needs a broader vision. NBC's Tom Costello has the latest.
The message from leading pandemic experts writing in the Journal of the American Medical Association: COVID-19 is here to stay, and the country needs to adapt to a new normal since vaccines and infections don't seem to offer lifelong immunity. That means treating COVID like other respiratory viruses.
We have to reorient our goal so that we get it to a manageable state and we can continue with our normal life while COVID's around, just like we do with flu.
The call for a new strategy comes as confirmed cases are at an all-time high, driven by Omicron. Hospitals nationwide swamped with patients, most unvaccinated, say their frontline doctors and nurses are under tremendous stress.
We're just beyond exhausted, depleted, and we're asking for your grace and understanding while in the hospital.
Oxygen's not enough, the ventilator's not enough, and they require ECMO, and they're laying in bed for months, for weeks to months.
It's just been a lot of uncertainty, and I'm tired.
Meanwhile, pediatric COVID hospitalizations are at an all-time high, most involving unvaccinated children. For children under 5, a croup-like cough is often the sign of Omicron infection. In the ICU at Colorado Children's Hospital, a third of the cases are COVID admissions.
Kids, like adults, are catching it just as quickly and bringing huge numbers of children to our emergency departments.
All right, Tom joins us now from Children's National Hospital in Washington. Tom, I have a couple questions for you tonight, but let's start with some new reporting I know you have from that hospital right where you're reporting from tonight.
Well, the story here is similar at pediatric hospitals across the country. They are seeing a flood of kids coming in with COVID. Now, there's an important distinction. Some kids come in and they may have, for example, appendicitis. They test everybody for COVID, and so a lot of those kids are also testing positive for COVID. But we're really talking about admissions for COVID. A lot of kids around the country being admitted to hospitals, and especially under the age of 5, they, of course, are not vaccine eligible. So doctors are saying, please, when your kid is eligible to get a vaccine, vaccinate them, because it is a very strong defense against Omicron and Delta. Tom?
And Tom, I want to talk about that reporting you had at the top of your story about those advisors to the president when he was transitioning into the White House on the pandemic, also calling for a new national strategy. Can you tell our viewers some of the solutions they're proposing?
So I had a long conversation with Dr. Zeke Emanuel today, and you know he's at the University of Pennsylvania Med Center, and he says we've got to stop thinking about this as if we're in the emergency of the month or the emergency of the variant. We go from Delta to Omicron to whatever's next. We're going to live with this. It's going to be endemic the rest of our lives. So we need to come up with a way where we can test, and then immediately, if you test positive, immediately get you into therapeutics if necessary, get you into monoclonal antibodies, get you into the necessary medical attention. And that needs to be a fast-paced type of system. And he says we simply right now don't have the system in place to do that. So they're calling for a whole new national infrastructure where you and I can get tested, immediately get the medical intervention or the care that we need. And so this is something you and I are going to probably be getting shots for, boosters for, maybe the rest of our lives.
Tom Costello tonight with the new reporting on the pandemic. We're also tracking another round of winter weather causing a mess on the roads. Take a look at this video. New dash cam showing a minivan barreling towards a Wyoming trooper after the car skidded off an icy road. The trooper looks to be okay. A major system now on the move after dumping snow on parts of the South. In Kentucky, portions of I-75 shut down in both directions after officials say they responded to more than 80 crashes today. The Northeast and Mid-Atlantic now bracing for more snow and ice just days after another storm left drivers stuck on I-95, you'll remember, for more than 24 hours. This system expected to impact the morning commute. Let's get right to Al Roker. He joins us again tonight on Top Story with those details. Al, good evening.
Hey, good evening, Tom. And again, as we saw yesterday, we're talking about brutal wind chills again. Wind chills down to 55 below zero from Montana all the way to central Illinois. And we've got winter weather advisories and warnings for 78 million people. We're looking right now into the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, the Appalachians. Nashville still getting snow. They got 4 inches of snow today, most they've seen in 6 years. And this big system is going to be intensifying as it moves off the coast overnight, becoming a bomb cyclone, dropping 24 millibars in 24 hours, spreading heavy snow from Virginia to Maine. It moves away Friday, but not before it does a lot of damage for tomorrow morning's commute. The snow will taper off by the afternoon. Colder air will come in behind it, but in the meantime, snowfall rates 1.5 to 2 inches per hour, heaviest along I-95, but also I-90, I-76 as well. Snowfall amounts generally 3 to 5 inches, Tom. Boston could see 4 to 8. What we're most concerned about at the climate unit is this system may start to overproduce. There's a thin area that may see as much as twice as much snow as we are predicting. And as I mentioned, bitter cold moving in early next week. Look at Burlington, Vermont. By Tuesday, 8. New York City, 25. 30 in Cincinnati on Monday, and 5 degrees in Minneapolis by the time Monday begins next week. So, Tom, we're looking at some really rough weather for another 24 hours.
Yeah, it's going to get cold and a lot of snow. All right, Al, thank you. We want to turn overseas now to our continuing coverage out of Kazakhstan, where security forces killed dozens of protesters overnight, angry over rising fuel prices and government corruption reaching a boiling point. At least 12 police officers killed, 2 of them reportedly beheaded. Russian troops now on the way in an unprecedented show of force. The stability of the region hanging in the balance. Here's NBC foreign correspondent Matt Bradley.
Tonight, bloodshed on the streets of Kazakhstan as protests take a deadly turn. Shots ringing out across the city of Almaty. Security forces say they, quote, eliminated dozens of demonstrators, leaving more than 1,000 injured after swarms of armed protesters sieged government buildings and set them on fire overnight. At least 12 officers were killed, another 350 hurt, 2 of them beheaded, according to police. Authorities releasing this surveillance footage showing a car plowing through a line of officers responding to the protests. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's residence in Almaty desolate and charred. A day after armed protesters broke in, their burnt-out trucks lodged in security checkpoints. Russia and its allies sending armored vehicles and soldiers to the region. The unprecedented show of force marks the first time the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, the Russian equivalent of NATO, has deployed troops to aid one of its member nations.
This will be a big test for the CSTO, which has, in previous instances in Kyrgyzstan and in Armenia, not wanted to take on much of a role, but also a big test for Russia, whether it has the capability to stabilize the situation in a country that is quite important for its own security.
The protests in Kazakhstan, which were sparked by anger over a surge in fuel prices, have since exploded into nationwide demonstrations. People angry over economic inequality and government corruption pouring into the streets for 5 straight days. The president conceded to demands to reinstitute price caps on fuel and replace his entire cabinet, but all that has done little to quiet the movement. Tonight, the UN calling for restraint on all sides.
People have a right to express their grievances. It needs to be done peacefully, and security forces need to protect that right.
The unrest in Kazakhstan, one of the most economically and politically stable former Soviet states, now threaten to destabilize a region already reeling from similar democratic uprisings in Ukraine and Belarus, but with Russian troops on the ground and protesters not satisfied with the government's response, a peaceful end to the conflict is nowhere in sight. Matt Bradley, NBC News.
We thank Matt for that. Back here at home, an update now in the case of Jeffrey Epstein's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. Her lawyers asking for a new trial after 2 jurors admitted they may have swayed the jury with their own stories of sex abuse. The judge in the case now asking to hear from lawyers on both sides as she considers whether to throw out Maxwell's conviction for sex trafficking of minors. NBC News correspondent Tom Winter has more.
Tonight, In a trial that centered on sexual abuse, 2 jurors reveal they too have experienced abuse, their own personal experiences now pushing Ghislaine Maxwell's attorneys to ask for a new case. At issue, legal experts say, whether or not the 2 were adequately forthcoming about their experiences before trial. A man identifying himself as Scotty David was one of the jurors. He spoke to several media outlets, including thedailymail.com.
I don't want to call her a monster. A predator is the right word.
David, known as juror number 50, says other jurors voiced doubt about some of the accusers.
Some people were like, how could they keep going back? Like, why would their moms allow them to do that? And I was like, we can't judge them based on what they did or didn't do. They're 14. They don't really have the wherewithal to know really what's right and wrong.
David was specifically asked if he had ever been the victim of sexual abuse before he was picked to be on the jury, according to a publicly available copy of the questionnaire, but says he doesn't remember that question and that he answered all questions honestly. David did not return requests from NBC News for comment and has hired an attorney. A second juror who requested anonymity told the New York Times they were sexually abused as a child and that they had also discussed the experience during deliberations. Prosecutors on Wednesday called for the court to conduct an inquiry into the statements, saying they, quote, merit attention by the court. The judge who oversaw the trial says she wants to hear from both the prosecution and defense, but isn't committing yet to bringing back the juror to court. After Maxwell's conviction on 5 counts, including 2 for sex trafficking, her accusers felt vindicated.
I just feel so grateful that the jury believed us and sent a strong message that perpetrators of sexual abuse and exploitation will be held accountable no matter how much power and privilege that they have.
Now the question, will the victims who say they finally got justice in this case have to take the stand and confront Ghislaine Maxwell all over again? Tom Winter, NBC News, New York.
All right, we thank Tom for that report. For more on this, we turn now to NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. So, Danny, my first question to you, you heard Tom's reporting there. The jury survey, those questions were very clear. If one or more of these jurors didn't answer those questions specifically, or I should say correctly, right, is that enough to declare a mistrial?
Correctly, using your word, no. Honestly is the key. The question becomes for the court, is the answer on the questionnaire wrong, and was it done dishonestly? And then, even if a juror gave a dishonest answer, Maxwell's team still has to establish the second prong of what's called the McDonough test in this jurisdiction. Essentially, the first prong is that the juror was dishonest. The second prong has to be that the dishonesty, had they known the truth, the attorneys, it would have resulted in a for-cause challenge. In other words, that juror would have been challenged based on that particular bias. So it is a very uphill climb for a defendant who seeks to overturn a conviction and get a new trial based on a juror's failure to disclose information on a questionnaire. The mere fact that they may have inadvertently or just don't remember answering it or incorrectly, that goes a long way against the defendant, because the court is really looking for a deliberate concealment that leads to an inference or a conclusion of juror bias. That's the key here.
Danny, but Danny, say the juror, because he said he doesn't remember the question, but he answered honestly. Don't you think any defense attorney worth his salt, that would have been a huge red flag if someone has been the victim of sexual abuse? They clearly would not want that person in the jury.
Exactly right. You can imagine deliberate concealment of facts that are not relevant to the case. For example, hey, I'm a juror, I'm a member of the NRA. For example, I'm not, but giving you an example, if I'm a member of the NRA, then in that case, that isn't something that would have affected this case. This is not a firearms case. So deliberate concealment of a fact, as you pointed out, that would lead to a for-cause challenge. That's what the court's looking for here.
Real quick, because we don't have a whole lot of time, what do you think is going to happen?
I think we're going to get a hearing, and the key inquiry, what they're really going to laser focus on, is what was in that questionnaire and whether it was reasonable or they believe that the juror accidentally didn't disclose, or 2 jurors didn't do that. And then further, they're going to have to find out whether or not this is a bias that would have led to a for-cause challenge. You know, the 99% of these challenges have zero hope whatsoever. I'm only aware of one case in this jurisdiction ever that I even know of through my research. That's how rare it is to get a new trial based on allegations of juror misconduct. So if you're just playing the odds, Maxwell's team is in the fight of their life.
Yeah, it's no doubt very rare, but again, this is becoming very, very public. All right, Danny, we thank you for your legal analysis always. We turn now to the disappearance of 7-year-old Harmony Montgomery. We've been covering her story now for several nights. Tonight, both her father and stepmother have been arrested. They haven't been charged in connection to Harmony's disappearance, but with crimes related to custody of the little girl who is still missing. Maura Barrett has the latest.
Tonight, new arrests in the saga of Harmony Montgomery, but the little girl still nowhere to be found after being reported only recently that she's been missing for the last 2 years.
The loss of any little child is tragic. A 7-year-old girl missing for 2 years. She's a daughter. She's a sister. She's out there somewhere.
Kayla Montgomery, the wife of Harmony's biological father, arrested on welfare fraud charges. Prosecutors say she obtained $1,500 in food stamps intended for Harmony after failing to remove the girl from their family account. She's being held on $5,000 bail. Her attorney says that's high for this kind of offense.
It tells me there's suspicions from the state that there may be something else involved. I don't know whether those suspicions are well-founded or not, but the request for cash bail is pretty unusual given what she's charged with.
Adam Montgomery had legal custody of Harmony at the time she was last seen. He was also arrested Tuesday. Neither is charged for her disappearance. Adam is charged with second-degree assault, interference with custody, and endangering the welfare of a child. One of those instances, investigators say Adam struck Harmony in the face, causing a black eye in 2019. Kevin Montgomery, Adam's uncle, was visiting the home around that time.
I walked in the house and Harmony had a black eye like you see in a boxing match between two men. He bashed her around the apartment, kind of with his exact words.
According to court documents, Kevin says he and other family members made multiple reports to New Hampshire's Division for Children, Youth, and Families.
And I don't know how they missed the black eye that I saw.
Police say they found Adam sleeping in his car with his new girlfriend on New Year's Eve. He told police he'd given Harmony back to her biological mother around Thanksgiving back in 2019. Her mother, Crystal Sorey, disputes this, according to the court documents. Police say he made some contradictory statements and, quote, did not exhibit much emotion or reaction to the fact that Harmony hadn't been seen in 2 years. A few days after this conversation, police maintain they're still searching for a young girl who is alive.
All right, this is not a recovery. All efforts are focused on that Harmony is alive, and we are going to do everything we can to find her in that condition.
Maura Barrett joins us now. Maura, this story just gets more horrific the more we learn about it. So the fall of 2019, around that time, Adam says he gave Harmony to her mother, is around the last time she was seen and then wasn't reported missing for another 2 years. Do we have any more clarity on that timeline?
So, Tom, according to these new court documents that we were able to review today, her mother said that she didn't get Harmony on that Thanksgiving. In fact, she didn't even see her then. The last time her mother had seen her was on a video call back in April of 2019. She reported this to the Manchester police in November of 2021. So just a few months ago. That lag time in between is still very unclear. And then it was about a month after that the New Hampshire Department of Children, Youth, and Families said that it, too, was also unable to locate Harmony. Now, we reached out to that department for some more clarity, but again, they said that due to state and federal requirements that they're unable to confirm or deny whether a family has history in their system. And so, Tom, there's still a lot of murkiness in this very tragic story.
An incredibly sad story. Maura Barrett with those new details. Maura, thank you. Still ahead tonight, wild shootout. Body cam footage showing NYPD officers exchanging gunfire with a suspect on the sidewalk the moment both officers realized they were hit. Plus, Antonio Brown's tirade, the wide receiver speaking for the first time since his fallout with the Bucs, even taking aim at Tom Brady. And the group of young people caught on cam, look at this, partying on a plane, no masks, why the now viral video left some of them stuck in Mexico. Stay with us. Top story just getting started on this Thursday night. All right, we're back now with the ongoing drama between the Tampa Bay Bucs and NFL star Antonio Brown. The Bucs fired Brown today, but the wide receiver wasn't going to go down quietly and lashed out on social media, even going after Tom Brady. Here's NBC's Morgan Chesky.
Tonight, NFL lightning rod Antonio Brown with an all-out Twitter blitz, burning all bridges with the Tampa Bay Bucs.
That's Antonio Brown without his uniform.
After his infamous Sunday meltdown, the question was, what triggered his walk-off? Brown now telling his side on social media, tweeting, "I relented to pressure directly from my coach to play injured. Despite the pain, I suited up. I gave it my all for the team. I played until it was clear that I could not use my ankle to safely perform my playing responsibilities." The Bucs deny knowledge of any injury.
At no point in time during that game did he ever ask the trainer or doctor about his ankle.
Today, the team finally released the wide receiver. A fed-up head coach Bruce Arians says the only complaint Brown was making at halftime was that he didn't get the ball enough.
He refused to go in the game. That's when I looked back and saw him basically wave off the coach. I then went back, approached him about what was going on. I ain't playing. What's going on? I ain't getting the ball. That's when I said, "You're done. Get the F out of here." And that's the end of it.
He even named his biggest ally and an all-time great Tom Brady in a tweet, claiming Brady and his trainer ripped him off. Imagine your QB trainer charging you $100K, then doing no work, adding it must have been their plan all along. Brown has since deleted those tweets. Last Sunday, Brady defended Brown.
I think everyone should be very compassionate and empathetic toward, some very difficult things that are happening.
Today, Brady made it clear he's ready to move on.
I think there's a lot of personal, obviously, feelings. I don't think there's really a week to discuss it, though, so.
Morgan joins us now. You know, Morgan, this is sort of hard to follow. We started at a point where a lot of people thought this was about mental illness. We're now talking about a potential ankle injury or another scenario where he wasn't getting the ball. And it sounds like Antonio Brown wasn't just on Twitter today.
Yeah, Tom, that's right. Brown also took to Instagram, where he posted a series of text messages in which he was communicating with Bucs head coach Bruce Arians, in which it appears that Brown disclosed that ankle injury, which is a direct contradiction with Arians' claim that he was unaware of that injury prior to Sunday's game against the New York Jets. Tom?
Morgan Chesky for us tonight. Morgan, thank you. When we come back, a new clue in the search for a missing woman. Authorities combing a Florida state park. The new cell phone video given to police by hikers who saw her there. And on the front lines, one of the Capitol officers injured during the insurrection. What he told our Andrea Mitchell about his road to recovery. That's next. All right, we're back now with Top Stories news feed, and we begin with the search for a missing 31-year-old woman in Florida. This new chilling video shows Paola Miranda swimming in a lake at a state park just outside of Orlando. The video shot by hikers on December 18th. The Tampa woman's family says they have not seen her since December 17th. Her car was found at the park. Air, canine, and dive crews involved in this search. Authorities also deploying drones and an underwater camera. All right, new body cam footage showing a shootout in New York City that left 2 officers injured.
85!
Call a bus.
Call a bus! Ooh, can't hear anything.
Call a bus. Call a bus. I'm shot.
I'm shot too.
Police say the officers were responding to reports of an armed man at an apartment building when a struggle began. Shots were then fired. Both officers were hit, but they're expected to be okay. The suspect also treated for a gunshot wound and is now facing several charges. All right, a massive fire in Wisconsin destroying 2 historic buildings. Crews in Superior battling freezing temperatures while trying to fight the flames. Officials say the fire started in a warehouse before spreading to a second building. Both were built in the 1800s. No injuries were reported, but a bridge in the area was briefly shut down. The cause is now under investigation. All right, and the FBI is now investigating a series of bomb threats targeting historically black colleges and universities. At least 8 schools, including Howard in Washington and Spelman in Atlanta, receiving threats on Tuesday. Buildings and dorms temporarily evacuated. No explosives were found. All right, we want to return to our coverage of the one-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. Many police officers who defended the Capitol still battling the traumatic memories of that day. NBC News Chief Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell spoke to one officer who was injured during the attack about the toll it took on him and his colleagues.
It is one of the most iconic and terrifying scenes from the insurrection.
My arms were pinned and effectively useless, trapped against either the shield on my left or the door frame on my right. The man in front of me grabbed my baton that I still held in my hands. He bashed me in the head and face with it.
Daniel Hodges is a D.C. cop, a 7-year veteran. Tell me how you feel when you think back to what happened to you on January 6th.
The same as I did immediately afterward, angry, sad.
When he saw the video, at first he was embarrassed. Later, glad people could see how dire it was.
It never goes away completely, but I've always been fairly resilient mentally. When I see footage of that day, it makes my blood pressure shoot up.
An added burden for Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn. The racial epithets hurled at him by the mob. When the Capitol finally cleared.
How the blank could something like this happen? Is this America? I began sobbing. Officers came over to console me.
Emotions that are still raw to this day.
I felt like helplessness and depression after the 6th, immediately after. Since then, it's turned into anger.
80 officers who defended the Capitol that day have met in small groups with trauma expert Dr. James Gordon.
The long-term mental health effects are very, very significant, and they're manifesting the distress at the divisiveness, but also threat to the democracy.
4 officers who survived the attack later died by suicide. Have you found officers with suicidal thoughts?
Yes, and I'm sure there are many who are not speaking about their suicidal thoughts.
Are you afraid if something were to happen that you'd be afraid to go back into the fray?
Not at all. It's my job.
But he and many others on the thin blue line still want accountability for the tragedy of last January 6th. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
All right, we thank Andrea for that. Now to the video showing a group of Canadian tourists on a private flight to Cancun partying maskless and ignoring health regulations. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau among those expressing outrage. Some of those passengers now stuck in Mexico and potentially facing thousands in fines. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has the latest.
Guys, entend du bruit? Bienvenue au 111 private flight!
Tonight, outrage over recent video from the skies of a scene playing out as if the world was not combating the pandemic's most contagious variant yet. Social videos circulating in Canadian media of a plane of maskless adults partying in the air. They're on a chartered flight from Montreal to Cancun.
I think like all Canadians who've seen those videos, I'm extremely frustrated.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau not mincing words.
And it's a slap in the face to see people putting themselves, putting their fellow citizens, putting airline workers at risk.
Canada's Minister of Transportation saying the government will, quote, immediately launch an investigation into these allegations, adding they could issue fines of $5,000 to each passenger. Now, at least some of those passengers stuck in Mexico, where infections are rising across the country, especially in major tourism destinations like Cancun. They're experiencing the highest infection totals since the pandemic began. One passenger telling the Canadian press that she tested positive for COVID and is isolating in Mexico. NBC News also viewed her apology posted on social media. The flight's organizer pushing back today on the criticism, saying in a statement, "We also took additional steps by getting everyone tested before leaving Montreal to make sure the whole group was safe." The Omicron variant sweeping the world as countries wrestle with international travelers.
Rules are rules. And there are no special cases.
Australia denying unvaccinated tennis star Novak Djokovic entrance into the country on Thursday, left waiting at the airport, hoping for a medical exemption. This as other countries lift some requirements for entry, relenting to the struggle against Omicron's infectiousness. England on Friday will no longer require a negative test for fully vaccinated travelers before flying to the country. And Israel intends to end its moratorium on arriving flights from several countries, including the U.S.
To what extent can it be kept from being spread across these international borders at this point?
You're not going to stop it, but you could possibly slow it down, which could really help your healthcare system. You're also seeing other countries around the world saying, okay, it's time we learn to live with this virus.
As for the Canadians now stuck in Mexico, their organizer says the charter company canceled their return flight, and they're searching for another way home.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard joins us now from here in New York. You know, Vaughn, from those videos that we're watching there in your story, it looks like it was a pretty wild party. Has the organizer offered any kind of apology, or have they put out any kind of statement?
No public apology at this time yet that we're aware of, Tom. He has issued a statement in which he says that he required everybody aboard that flight receive a negative test before getting on board, and only those individuals who he authorized to attend that flight were on board. At the same time, he said he understands why people are upset by the current situation, but he noted that he is somebody who enjoys bringing people together. Tom?
All right, Vaughn Hilliard for us tonight. Vaughn, thank you. Coming up, the ransom paid, what we've just learned about the group of missionaries held captive in Haiti, and how some of them were freed. Stay with us. All right, back now with Top Stories Global Watch, and we begin with deadly clashes in Sudan. Security forces killing several anti-coup protesters as thousands rallied in cities to denounce military rule. It was the first wide-scale demonstration since the prime minister resigned on Sunday. At least 60 people have died in crackdowns on protesters following the coup in October. All right, there's new details on those 17 missionaries you may remember who were held captive in Haiti. The Ohio-based Christian group says an unidentified person paid a ransom to the kidnappers. The ransom was supposed to free all of them, but it only led to 3 of them being released on December 5th. The rest of the group was eventually freed late last month. No word on how much was paid, but the gang had originally demanded $1 million per person. And Christians around the world are observing Epiphany, known as Three Kings Day for Catholics. It's celebrated across Latin America and the Caribbean and Spain. There are parades and customs, including leaving grass or hay for the 3 wise men and their camels in exchange for a gift, sometimes in a boot. In Mexico, the holiday is not complete without an oval-shaped bread known as Rosca de Reyes. Orthodox Christians celebrate the baptism of Jesus today. After a blessing ceremony, swimmers compete to retrieve a cross that was thrown into the sea. All right, when we come back, inside the insurrection as we mark 1 year since the Capitol riot, the first-hand accounts from members of Congress who were there. Stay with us. Finally tonight, we want to end the broadcast on the 1-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection by hearing from those who were there. Today, House lawmakers shared their personal experiences from 1 year ago, including hiding in the House gallery with rioters just outside the doors.
We could hear the shouting and commotion in the hallway outside the gallery, and then the pounding on the door to the chamber as the members on the House floor were evacuated. Terror and adrenaline coursed through our bodies as we lay on the floor, hidden behind the gallery rail.
I remember every moment vividly. I viscerally feel the pounding on the gallery doors. I hear the shot ringing out. I replay how I made plans to use my gas mask and my cane, newly at my side from a 5-week-old knee replacement surgery, to fight back if attacked. And I remember not knowing if I would make it out of our seat of democracy alive, or if our democracy itself would survive.
Those of us trapped in the gallery, we lived it. Ducking, crawling, under, over railings, hands, knees, the sounds, the smells. We had a front row seat to what lies, hate, or plain old misinformation conjures. We went from victims to witnesses, and today we are messengers. We reflect on the fact that January 6th was about so much more than an effort to break into a building. It was an effort to break down our institutions.
While there was still blood on the walls, still broken glass on the floor, while we ourselves were shaken, we came back and we voted to certify an American presidential election. It's my honor to serve with every single one of you. I'm sorry that we've gone through this together, but I can tell you, our country's worth it. Our democracy is worth it.
Our democracy is worth it. Thanks so much for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.